expedition, exist, expression, expert, exceed, expect, expand. Philippine Topics Connect Exclusive.
皆さんこんにちは。今日は皆さんにフィルトピの新番組コネクトエクスクルーシブをお届けします。フィルトピのカズです。よろしくお願いします。この番組のアシスタント2人を今から紹介します。
はい、日本とフィリピンのハーフ椎名と申します。初めての経験ですが、勉強しながら頑張っていきますので、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
皆さんはじめまして、椎名さんと同じくフィリピンと日本のハーフのエイジと申します。今回は翻訳のアシスタントとして入っているので、視聴者の方に分かりやすい日本語を届けられるよう頑張りたいと思います。よろしくお願いいたします。
2020年の開局以来、フィルトピはフィリピンの最新ニュースと最新情報を動画でお伝えするチャンネルとして多くの皆様に応援をしていただきました。昨年までの2年間はコロナパンデミックの影響で自宅からのライブニュースが中心となっていましたが、2022年はコネクトという新しい番組を立ち上げて1月から放送をさせていただいています。今から放送する番組はエクスクルーシブの名の通り、通常ではお会いすることも難しいフィリピンの経済界の重要人物たちの独占インタビューを行っていきます。今年に入ってから私たちはこの企画の準備を着々と進めてきました。本日はその第1回目の放送として PHOA フィリピンホテルオーナーズ協会常務理事のボン・ベンゾンさんのインタビューをお届けします。ベンゾンさんは昨年7月までフィリピン政府観光省の事務次官を務めておられた方です。政府の官僚トップとしてパンデミック下のフィリピン観光のすべてに関わられた後、現在は300以上のホテルチェーンが加盟するホテルオーナー協会の常務理事として働いておられます。私たち日本人にとっても大変興味深いお話をこれから伺うことができますので、どうぞ最後までご視聴ください。
それでは今からフィリピンホテルオーナー協会常務理事、元フィリピン観光省事務次官ボン・ベンゾン氏のコネクトエクスクルーシブ独占インタビューをお届けします。
この番組はご覧のスポンサーの提供でお送りします。
Philippine Topics Connect Exclusive.
はい、皆 皆さんこんにちは。本日はですね、フィルトピコネクトエクスクルーシブという新しい番組の記念すべき第1回目のゲストとして、フィリピンホテルオーナーズアソシエーションのベンソンさんですね、ミスター・ベンソンさんに今日は来ていただきました。今からですね、本当に貴重な時間をいただいてお忙しい方なので、いくつか私たちの方からですね、このホテル業界について、そしてまたフィリピンの観光業界についてですね、質問をさせていただきたいと思います。本日はどうぞよろしくお願いします。まずインタビューを始める前にですね、最初に簡単な自己紹介をしていただきたいと思います。これまでどんな学びをしてこられたのか、また以前の職務についてですね、働きについて、それからこれまでのどういったことをされてきたのかということを簡単に教えていただけますでしょうか。
Thank you very much for having me in your program. In terms of my educational background, I studied BS Hotel and Restaurant Administration at the University of the Philippines. I also took up my master's in business administration at Ateneo de Manila and my master's in national security administration from the National Defense College of the Philippines. In terms of my work experience, I spent 35 years with the Department of Tourism. Out of the 35 years, I spent 7 years working at the tourism office at the Philippine Embassy in Tokyo. So I'm a little bit familiar with Tokyo. I love Japan and I hope I can go back. I am now with the Philippine Hotel Owners Association as Executive Director and I've been there for 6 months.
今お話の中に日本の大使館で働かれていたということ出てきたんですけれども、そして日本が大好きだということなんですけども、日本での何か思い出というかエピソードはありますか？
The 7 years that I spent in Tokyo were probably among the most memorable in my entire career in government. It gave me the opportunity to get to know Japanese people very closely, and I was also able to move around all over Japan, from Hokkaido all the way to Okinawa. So I'm quite familiar with the different areas in Japan. I love the food. Okay, I think that's one thing that is very memorable for me. But apart from that, I think what made it really very special was my relationship with friends in Japan. Friends that I made from the travel trade and the tourism industry, and also friends, of course, from the Philippine Embassy. The Japanese are very courteous, they're very respectful, they're very efficient, and these are the memories that to this day I carry with me.
もう本当に最初の質問で非常に親日家であるということが分かってすごく僕も嬉しいんですけれども、私自身はフィリピンが大好きで今いるわけですけれども、フィリピンと日本の文化で一番違うと思ったことっていうのはありますか？
Let me start with the similarities. I think one thing that we have in common is the value that we put in friendship. I think this is something that we see among Japanese and among Filipinos. We value friendship, and once you make friends with somebody, you can be sure that that relationship will last for a very, very long time. The other thing that I think is common between the Japanese and Filipinos is the love for family. We love our family very much, we spend time with them, and I think this is also another special trait or characteristic of the Japanese and Filipinos. Of course, our love for food, that is something that is very common. I think in terms of the difference, that's a little bit more challenging to answer. But I think I would like to focus more on what we have in common, rather than what is different, no, between our people. I think what's also important is that diplomatically, the Philippines and Japan have had a very long relationship. The official diplomatic ties started in 1956 and to this day remains very strong. And this is something that we hope we can continue to build on and to strengthen in the years to come.
非常にその日本とフィリピンの友好というか友情というかそういう部分を、強調されていたと思うんですけれども、日本の食べ物で一番好きなものは何でしたか？
Of course, I like sushi and sashimi and tempura and tebasaki, torimomo. But I also like even the rather exotic types of Japanese cuisine. Basashi I eat, fugu I eat. So I think almost anything that is served on my plate, as long as it's Japanese cuisine, I will eat it.
もう日本の食べ物は何でも好きだっていうふうにねおっしゃられていて、観光業のお仕事で来られていたので冒頭におっしゃられてましたけれども、日本全国おそらく旅行されて東京だけではなくて、訪問されたんじゃないかなというふうに思いますね。今日の本題である、フィリピンホテルオーナーズアソシエーションについて伺いたいと思うんですけれども、現在所属されている PHOA での、役職と、それからどんなお働きをされているのか教えていただけますか。
The Philippine Hotel Owners Association is a non-stock, non-profit association that was established in 1977. It is made up of investors, owners, and developers of hotels, resorts, and other accommodation establishments all over the country. We are considered to be the largest investor from the private sector in the Philippine tourism industry. My responsibility basically as executive director is to run the day-to-day operations of the association and to make sure that we're able to look after the interests of our members. We have about 300 members composed of hotels, resorts, other accommodation establishments all over the country. And our commitment is to uplift the standards of our facilities and services so that we can provide better service to our clients, both foreign and local.
わかりました。今のお話でメンバーであるホテルのオーナーたちとの働きということをおっしゃられていたんですけれども、実際の PHOA のオーガニゼーションの職員というか規模というのがどれぐらいなのかっていうことと、実際にはどのような事業さっき励ましたりとか、あとは調整したりというようなことをおっしゃられていたんですけれども、実際にはベンソンさんはどういうお働きをされているんでしょうか、普段は。
Part of my responsibility also is to make sure that we capacitate our members. So our training programs are continuous. Especially under the pandemic, it becomes even more important for us to empower our workers, particularly the frontliners. We have been very busy the last 24 months conducting health and safety training for our members. We have also been conducting a seminar on ventilation guidelines, which are also very important in the workplace. What we really want is to make sure that the hotels are ready when we see the influx of tourists, especially from abroad. So our commitment again is to make sure that our workers are able to provide a safe, comfortable, and enjoyable experience to our visitors. I also have to mention that our hotels were among the first industries to have 100% vaccination rate among the workers. Part of our work also is advocacy. We work very closely with other government agencies, particularly the Department of Tourism, the Department of Labor and Employment, the Department of Trade and Industry, the Department of Finance, with respect to policy measures that are needed to help our members. So in the area of marketing and promotions, for example, it's very important for us to work with the Department of Tourism. On the matter of incentives, it's very important for us to work with both the Department of Trade and Industry and the Department of Finance. And with respect to protection of our workers, ensuring that they're able to get adequate benefits, we work very closely with the Department of Labor and Employment. Over the last several months, we have been faithfully complying with the guidelines coming from the Interagency Task Force on Emerging Infectious Diseases, or IATF as we call it, which is the highest policy-making body of the government overseeing government's response to the pandemic. So this has been a challenge for us, but with the opening of our borders, we are very optimistic that we are now seeing signs of recovery.
今お話の中で IATF の話も出てきましたが、かつてベンソンさんは観光省ですねの高官であられたということで、政府の内部で働かれていたところから現在の NPO 団体に移られたというお話を先ほど伺ったんですが、観光省に在籍されていた当時と現在の PHOA のこのエグゼクティブディレクターとしての働きをされて、かつてのですね政府内部で働いていた時の働きがどのように見えるか、特にこのパンデミックがですね、でまたかつての立場から、現在の働きをどのように捉えられているのか、教えていただけますでしょうか。
That's a very interesting and very challenging question, very difficult one to answer. Certainly my new assignment with the Philippine Hotel Owners Association has given me a different perspective of how government works. And in a way, it has given a good balance, the government perspective and the private sector perspective. When I was still with the Department of Tourism, the perspective was very macro. No, we looked at the industry as a whole for the whole country, and we were looking at the needs of the different stakeholders across the different subsectors: airlines, hotels, travel agents, tour operators, tour guides, etc. Obviously, with my new assignment, it's more focused because I have to look after the interests of the hotel owners from the private sector point of view. I think what's important is that moving forward, the government agency that supervises the hotels, in this particular case the Department of Tourism, and the private sector association that represents hotels, in this case the PHOA, are able to work together so that they can make the industry more competitive. And to make the industry more competitive, it's very important to take a look at what the needs of the private sector stakeholders are in terms of incentives, in terms of policy interventions, in terms of marketing support, and in terms of training. So I think it has given me a good balance in a way that I'm now in the private sector. I see maybe some things that I wasn't able to see when I was still in government. But one advantage is that I'm able to relay, as private sector, I'm now able to relay to government with a clearer view what the requirements and what the needs of the private sector stakeholders are.
PHOA で今働かれていると思うんですけれども、以前その観光省にいらっしゃった時と現在ではホテル業界そのものに対しての見方とか考え方は変わりましたか？
Certainly, like I said, I'm part of the private sector now. I see it with a different lens, so to speak. It gives me a clear appreciation of what the needs are of the private sector. In terms of, like I said, marketing and promotions, in terms of policy measures, in terms of training. I think the most important takeaway here is that requirements and the needs of the hotels have to be clearly evaluated by the government because the hotels represent a very important component of the entire value chain in tourism. People talk about providing travel subsidies. People talk about providing financial assistance to workers. But it's also very important to consider some kind of assistance to the hotels because what you want is to make sure that they are still operating viably when the borders are open. There is no point in getting tourists to come in when the hotels and the resorts have already closed due to financial difficulties. So my being with PHOA has given me that perspective, a better understanding of what the requirements of the hotel owners are.
多くの人が聞く質問だと思うんですけれども、今回コロナパンデミックがあってこのフィリピンも例外なくロックダウンというのがあったわけですけれども、ホテル業界はその中でも最もダメージを受けたセクターだと思うんですけれども、それに対して各ホテルのオーナー、そのメンバーの方々ですね、ホテルオーナーたちというのはその運営を続けていくためにどのような対策をされていたのでしょうか？
The hotels were among the most severely impacted by COVID-19. When the borders were closed and travel restrictions imposed, it put a complete halt to international traffic. And the Philippines, just like most other countries, experienced a huge decrease in visitor arrivals from abroad. In 2020, the first year of the pandemic, the visitor arrivals went down by 85%. So you can just imagine the impact that it had on the hotels. So many hotels had to downscale. Some of them had to let go of their employees. Some had to resort to job rotation just so they can keep their jobs. There were also some adjustments in terms of the operations. The government set some limitations in the operational capacity, particularly for indoor dining and some banquet room or function room events or activities. So obviously this affected the revenue stream of the hotels. One thing that maybe distinguishes Philippine hotel operations from other parts of the world is that many of our hotels were used for quarantine of returning OFWs or overseas Filipino workers. So in a way, this has provided a steady source of income for the hotels. But it's also important for people to know that the room rates that we were charging were at a very low level because government put a ceiling on what we could charge. But nevertheless, it allowed us to pay for the basic expenses. Power, particularly, number one, and then number two, the salaries and wages. Our commitment in the Philippine Hotel Owners Association is to try and keep our employees. Now that the situation is getting better, we hope that we will be able to go back to pre-pandemic levels, meaning 2019 levels. And it's also important that we start welcoming in foreign visitors from our major source markets.
2022年の2月になってついにですね、このフィリピンも2月の10日からですかね、フィリピンへの入国者に対する隔離が大きく緩和されて、そしてフィリピンへの旅行者ですね、ツーリストも入ってくるようになって、ホテル運営についても本格化していくかと思うんですけれども、PHOA としてはそのための準備をどのようにされてきましたか。また2022年のこの1年間の見通しは今どのように回復されていくというふうに立てられているんでしょうか。
The members of the Philippine Hotel Owners Association have been preparing for the reopening of our borders since 2 years ago. So even when the pandemic was unfolding, we were already crafting protocols that will focus on health and safety because we knew that that would be a very important factor in the decisions of travelers. We have been conducting basic occupational safety and health seminars. We call it BOSH, B-O-S-H. I think the Japanese are quite experts when it comes to basic occupational safety and health because you set up the Occupational Safety and Health Center here in the Philippines. That is a clear demonstration of the importance that we place on the health and safety protocols. So across the different touch points in the customer journey of a guest, from the front desk to going to the rooms, to going to the restaurants, we make sure that we strictly follow the protocols. So that is one of the preparations that we have made in the last 2 years. The other preparation that we've made is in the area of training under the so-called new normal. So apart from the improvement of skills at the workplace, we also looked at other forms of training, digital marketing and promotions, organizing digital events or hybrid events later on. We also looked at even the issue of mental health, which became a very important factor under the pandemic. We have been giving a lot of attention to the mental health of our people. In terms of re-strategizing, there was a shift from quarantine operations from some of our members to regular hotel operations. So what you will see from February, March onwards would be a shift to the leisure market. And this is very timely because as we shift to the leisure market, we are also looking forward to the increase in arrivals of foreigners to the Philippines. The most difficult question to answer over the last 2 years is what the targets are, or more specifically, when will we go back to 2019 levels? That will depend on a lot of factors. Okay? The first and obvious one is to make sure that we're able to contain the pandemic. And this will mean keeping the number of cases down, making sure the vaccination and the booster rates are up. The second factor that has to be considered is how soon will the airlines be able to restore their flights. When we spoke to international carriers that are servicing the Philippines, we found out that the current operating capacity is only at about 30 to 40% of what it was in 2019. Domestically, the number of flights right now is maybe at 40, 50, at most 60% of what it was in 2019. So clearly, we have to bring it closer to 2019 levels. So very important for us to bring it to 60, 70, 80, 90%. The other thing that has to be considered is consumer confidence. And it's very important to assure visitors that we have all the safety protocols in place. So these are the factors that have to be addressed very closely if we want to ensure steady recovery. People have been talking of a timeline of 2 years to recover. Some are saying 2024 will be the earliest that we will go back to pre-pandemic levels. But that's really a difficult question to ask. I think to answer rather. What is important is that we have started the recovery and that we're able to sustain it.
かなり詳しく具体的にプランを教えていただいてすごく興味深いんですけれども、実は私たち Connect Exclusive というのは YouTube チャンネルなんですね。このフィリピンにおいてもいわゆるブロガーというか YouTuber というのはたくさんいると思うんですが、この PHOA の方であるいはこのホテル業界の方でですね、こういう YouTube とかあるいはソーシャルメディアという媒体、いわゆる一般人を通してダイレクトにマーケティングをしていくようなことっていうのは話題に上がってますでしょうか？
The members of the Philippine Hotel Owners Association have been marketing and promoting their properties very aggressively across different platforms. Of course, under the pandemic, there have been limitations with respect to on-site participation in travel exhibitions. Many of them have had to shift to the digital platforms, not surprisingly. So the challenge that lies ahead is to be able to sustain the interest of the different clients by maintaining a strong presence across different forms of digital media. Many of them are doing it, have been doing it, and will continue to do it in anticipation also of consumer changes in consumer behavior, changes in consumer travel patterns. Many of the consumers, especially among the younger ones, will be sourcing their information digitally, and this is something that they have to prepare for. We also realize that there will be some who will continue to market and promote the conventional way, meaning eventually when restrictions are eased even further, then we hope to see more face-to-face interaction between the Philippine hoteliers and their foreign counterparts.
Philippine Topics Connect Exclusive. Philippine Topics Connect Exclusive.
現在ですね、このホテル業界で最も大きい問題というのは、分かりやすく言うと収益が全体的に下がったということだと思います。で、その運営状態をコロナ前に戻すために、ホテルオーナーから聞いているどのような収益を戻すための対策っていうのは具体的にありますでしょうか。
Right now, the key strategy is to come up with an optimal mix of clients that will ensure a steady revenue stream. So, who are those clients? I mentioned that the quarantine market will be decreasing in the weeks and the months to come. So, hotels will have to rely on the leisure market. And when you talk about the leisure market, you're basically looking at inbound, meaning foreigners coming in, as well as the domestic market. For the domestic market, there's a very strong demand for staycation. Okay, Filipinos, checking in the hotels with their families, eating in the restaurants, etc. So this will provide a steady revenue stream. In the last few months, we've also been seeing an increase in the number of social events in the hotels. Parties, baptisms, weddings, especially now that the restrictions have been removed and they're able to operate at 100% capacity. So domestic tourism will provide a very strong base for many hotels. So this will be part of the key strategy to continue to market and to promote to the domestic market. And it's very timely because we're now approaching the summer season, which is traditionally a peak period for travel. So you will see strong demand for hotels here in Metro Manila and of course the resorts and the resort hotels all over the country. Now, as to the inbound market, of course, we will continue to look at short-haul markets. Japan, of course, is a very important and a very lucrative market for the Philippines, and we will step up our marketing and promotions efforts to get more Japanese to come to the Philippines.
この2年間で大きな話題になったことの一つに、ある大きなホテルチェーンがですね、営業を取りやめたことによって失業者を多く出したということがあったかと思います。経営者側から見ればですね、収益が見込めない以上レイオフを行うというのは当然の判断だと思うんですけれども、一方でフィリピン人としてベンソンさんもですね、フィリピン人として多くの人がこのホテル業界だけではありませんけれども、経済的な困難を経験したというのをどのように思われていたでしょうか。そしてまたこの間のですね、政府の対応についてはどのように感じられていましたか。
The hotels, as I mentioned, were among the most severely impacted by the pandemic. There were at least 2 major hotels that closed, hopefully just temporarily. The other hotels were able to survive by scaling down their operations and working out a job rotation scheme. On the part of the government, there were 2 laws that were passed that basically provided financial relief to the displaced workers. So this is direct cash assistance to displaced tourism workers. And this is something that was able to help many of the workers in tourism and in hotels cope with financial difficulties. Moving forward, what's important now is that government continues to provide very strong marketing and promotion support so that the awareness level of the Philippines as a destination remains very high. This will require very strong presence in the key markets all over the world. On the part of the Philippine Hotel Owners Association, our commitment is to keep our workers. We are now seeing signs of recovery. Those hotels that earlier scaled down on their operations are now starting to rehire or to get back their employees. We're hoping that the recovery will be steady and that we're hoping that with the opening of the borders, our occupancy rate will be at a level that will allow us to operate viably.
冒頭の自己紹介でかつては観光省で30年ですか勤められていて、そして最終的には観光省の事務次官というですね事務方のトップの働きをされていたわけですけれども、今回はホテルアソシエーションで働かれていて、無理難題というかその前の立場でなんとかならないんですかみたいなごっちゃにされるような質問というのはメディアから受けることというのはありますか？ベンソンさんのかつての働きと今の働きをごっちゃにするような質問とか要求っていうのが来るような体験というのはありましたか、この2年間。
I retired from the Department of Tourism in July last year. But up to now, some of my co-workers still call me up from time to time to ask me questions, maybe ask for my help in a way. And I don't mind, I mean, it's an organization that I worked for 35 years, so I don't mind at all. I have some friends from media who still call me up from time to time and request for interviews, although now I'm wearing a different hat with the Philippine Hotel Owners Association. But I think all in all, it's been a good transition. I'm able to maintain a good working relationship with my former co-workers. I continue to work very closely with partners from the private sector, travel agents, tour operators, airlines. Although, as I mentioned, it's in a different capacity. But I think the good balance here is that I see things from a private sector perspective, and I see it from a government perspective. And maybe that's the optimum balance that we need.
これちょっと難しい質問なんですけれども、この2年間で加盟されているホテルが受けたその負債を回復するためにはたくさんのお客さんですね、顧客が戻ってくることが必要です。そのためにホテルはプロモなどを準備して様々な割引を行ったりとか提案をすることが必要だと思うんですけれども、公共の時ならともかく一旦この今非常に困窮している状況の中で新たな顧客に対してですね有利な提案というのは可能なことなんでしょうか？そういったことを PHOA でもあるいはそのオーナーたちからも何か具体的ないいアイデアというのは聞いていますか？
The government has a role to play and the private sector has a role to play. On the part of the government, it's really making sure that basic health and safety protocols are in place. They have to provide that assurance to visitors, both the foreigners and even the locals. Consumer confidence is very important, and it has to be manifested in the different guidelines that private sector stakeholders should strictly adhere to. On the part of the hotels, obviously it's marketing and promoting their properties and making sure that they're able to offer rates that will be within reach of the consumers. They cannot price themselves out of the market. I think that much is obvious. In the restart of tourism and the hotel industry, it's important that we do this gradually. Eventually, we hope that the hotels will be able to charge the rates that they were charging before the pandemic. But right now, the key objective is just to make sure that there's steady flow of clients coming in, steady source of revenue coming in, so that we're able to keep operating the hotels at a viable level.
最近のニュースのことについて予定にない質問をさせていただきたいんですが、最近のニュースでですね、テレビなどのニュースで話されていることですけれども、クアランティンホテルについて今その政府のサポートがあるというような話が今ベンソンさんから伺ったんですけども、それについていくつかの大手メディアでは支払いが遅延しているというディレイがあるというような話題がこの1週間の間にあったと思うんですけれども、そのことについて何かコメントいただけますでしょうか。
To provide a background, the Philippine Hotel Owners Association has been working very closely with the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, or OWA, in providing quarantine rooms for returning overseas Philippine workers, or OFWs. the rates have been set at a certain ceiling. But just the same, we supported the efforts of the government to provide comfortable and safe accommodations to OFWs, because we knew that government and PHOA particularly needed help in providing these rooms. It just so happened that over the months, some of the accounts receivables of our hotels accumulated until it reached 1.7 billion pesos as of last Friday. But the good news is that we have already been assured by the Department of Labor and Employment and the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration that the funds will be released by this week and that the hotels will already be paid in full. So that's one thing that we're looking forward to.
Mm-hmm. あともう一つ伺いたいんですが、この2週間で世界中を騒がせている問題はロシアとウクライナの危機です。で、実際に現地では戦争状態になっているわけですけれども、ここフィリピンにおいては目下今話題になっているのはエネルギーの問題です。ガソリン、ディーゼル、それから LPG ですね。あらゆる現在フィリピンはインフレ状態なんですけれども、実際に本日からですね、ディーゼルも大幅な値上がりをしたということで、ドライバーとかそれから運送とかそれから航空業界とかそういうところに大きな影響を及ぼすと思うんですが、それがひいてはホテル業界を取り巻くですねところにも影響を及ぼすと思うんですが、現在どのようなことがベンソンさんの周囲では話題になってますでしょうか。
These are realities and challenges that we cannot ignore. As we speak, so many events are unfolding that can affect tourism and hotel operations in particular. Of course, just like everybody else, we are hoping that the situation does not get any worse than it is at the moment. But on the side of the hotels, what is important is that we continue to assess the situation and to make sure that we come up with a client or market mix that will effectively insulate hotels from whatever external developments there are. And when I talk about external developments, what is happening in Ukraine, of course, the increase in oil. It's going to be challenging, that's for sure. And what is important is that the hotels are able to immediately re-strategize and shift to markets that will help fill up the rooms.
Philippine Topics Connect Exclusive.
皆さんご視聴ありがとうございました。コネクトエクスクルーシブエピソード1、ボン・ベンゾン氏のインタビューいかがでしたでしょうか。実際にコロナパンデミック下でフィリピン政府観光省の事務次官として IATF に参与され、現政権の働きを担ってこられたベンゾンさんが昨年7月よりフィリピンホテルオーナー協会の常務理事として働いてこられたその様子を本当に詳しく教えてくださいました。私自身大変深い学びをする時間となりました。個人的にもこれまでフィリピンの政治家や経済界の重要人物とお会いすることができましたけれども、彼らに共通しているのは仕事への情熱とその深い洞察です。このような機会を通して日本の視聴者の皆さんにもフィリピンのこうした方々のインタビューを聞いていただけることをとても嬉しく思っています。英二さんは実際にこのインタビューの現場にいたわけですけれども、実際に出来上がった動画を今日見てみてどのような感想を持たれましたか。
はい、自分が当たり前だと思っていたホテルの快適な環境というのがベンゾンさんをはじめ PHOA の方々、そして政府観光省の働きかけがあることにより実現できているんだと分かり勉強になりました。
椎名さんはこの撮影からアシスタントとして参加してくださいましたけれども、出来上がった動画を見てどのような感想を持たれましたか。
はい、普段の生活からでは知ることのできない内容でしたので、このような貴重なインタビューを見させてもらい、 とても勉強になりました。今後のエクスクルーシブという番組がとても楽しみです。カズさんはインタビュアーとしてベンゾンさんと向き合われていましたが、印象に残ったことはありますか？
まず当日は自分でも信じられないほど緊張していたんですけれども、日本のフィリピン大使館で7年間勤められて大変な親日家であるということが分かって、日本食の話などもしてくださったので、それでリラックスすることができました。また日本とフィリピンの違いはという質問に対して、違いではなくて共通点から話しましょうかというふうに答えてくださったのがとても印象的で、さすがに日本とフィリピンの友好の架け橋をされていた方だと思いました。内容的には専門的な話が多かったんですけれども、さすがにトップにおられた方だけあって、私のようなものにも分かるように話してくださるその能力の高さに驚かされました。フィリピンのホテル業界と従業員たちのことをよく見ながら、このコロナパンデミックの危機、そしてエネルギー危機などを通して政府と民間の間で働かれている様子を聞くことができました。一言で言うと安っぽい言葉になりますけれども、このような特権的な立場を与えられて感謝しかありません。
これからエクスクルーシブはどのような予定があるのでしょうか？
今後はこのようにエクスクルーシブでしか取り上げることができない独占的なインタビューを撮影してリリースしていきたいと思っています。まだ名前は出せませんが、エピソード2のゲストの方も決まり、現在準備をしております。あっと驚くようなゲストが登場してくれます。その後も月に1回皆さんがどうしても見たくなるようなゲストの方々が出演してくださいますので、これまでのコンテンツとは一味違うエクスクルーシブの番組を楽しみにしていただきたいと思います。そしてフィルトピのチャンネルの方には多くの皆様から一旦止まってしまっているニュースをアップデートしてほしいという声もいただいていますので、この4月からは装いを新たにニュース番組を再開させていきたいと思っています。ということで、エイジさん、椎名さん、今日はありがとうございました。ぜひこれからもよろしくお願いいたします。
それでは最後に日本の視聴者の皆さんへベンゾンさんからメッセージをいただいておりますので、それを見てお別れしたいと思います。本日はご視聴ありがとうございました。
To our friends in Japan, we extend a warm welcome to all of you to visit the Philippines. We have opened up our borders and we welcome you to our many exciting destinations. The Philippines has over 7,000 islands for you to choose from. On the part of the Philippine Hotel Owners Association, we likewise extend an invitation for you to visit us and to check in our different hotels all over the country. Thank you very much.
はご覧のスポンサーの提供でお送りしました。